أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد والثناء لله رب العالمين باره الخلائق أجمعين الذي لا يبلغه مدحته القائلون ولا يحصي نعماءه العادون ولا يؤدي حقه المجتهدون ثم الصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وآله الطاهرين اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. أما بعد فقد قال الله تعالى في كتابه المجيد وقوله الحق بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل إنما أعظكم بواحدة أن تقوموا لله مثنى وفرادى صلوا على محمد وآل محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Assalamu alaikum, dear brothers and sisters, viewers, those who are watching online, and a few brothers that are sitting in the gathering. Alhamdulillah, we made it to Majlis number 5. As we know by now that I've been discussing this idea of working towards an Islamic culture, and so far these first 4, 5 to 6 speeches are essentially first me discussing the status quo. Where are we currently? We divided the world into the modern and the pre-modern. We discussed the God-centric lens and the human-centric lens, and this God-centric lens is going to help us basically figure out what an Islamic culture is supposed to look like, as opposed to the culture that we are currently living in right now. And yesterday we spoke about one of the examples, how a certain paradigm, a certain way of looking at the world, where the meanings of some of the words that we use are changed and certain perceptions are manufactured for us. Specifically the word freedom and what it means and what it entails, and how sometimes we also end up falling for that the basically the man or human centric paradigm, and the way the discourse is shaped in the modern world, we end up falling for it, and then we end up subjugating the Islamic tradition and the God centric lens, the way we are supposed to live and behave, our own tradition, to this modern and man centric lens. And then I gave an example of how some of these uh, you know Instagram people use the word choice, and my choice when it comes to hijab and what it entails. Today, we're going to continue with one more example of how this also occurs, but for a different paradigm. You see, one thing we want to mention is that when the modern world began to take over the Muslim world, 19th century, 17th, 18th, 19th, 20th century, these last few centuries, particularly after the 20th century, when you started now having nation states being developed, all of these Muslim countries are now being colonized and they're changing, and now you have the birth of different countries in the Muslim world. The average age of a border in the Muslim world is around 20th century. Okay, most of these countries are very new, just over 100 years ago. What you also had was now a sort of resistance, or perhaps a reaction from the Muslim world in response to the Western modern lens of looking at the world. Okay, you had a reaction. Within this reaction in the East, what you ended up seeing is that sometimes you had a reaction which was, pulling people to a very extremist, literalist type of interpretation. Okay, they had this idea that we need to take we need to go back to the Quran and Hadith literally, and just following that will take us back to superiority, and we will be able to dominate and get rid of these Western perceptions. Some people, on the other hand, said, no, we just need to reform our understanding of Islam. The West is correct. We messed it up. We messed up our interpretation. And you had these different political movements that came and so on. So sometimes you also had scholars reacting in a scientific manner. So for example, they started subjugating the Quranic tafsir to scientific tafsir, and we see the impacts of this even today, right? We're always trying to somehow prove that Imam Sadiq was the greatest scientist. Okay, why are we trying to do this? If I have a chance to talk about this as well, on how science is also, how it sort of dominated our language, and why we are so insistent on proving that Imam Sadiq is the greatest scientist. This is all modern. Okay, nobody called Imam Sadiq the greatest scientist for 1,000 years. No scholar said that, because science, it has a very specific connotation when you say that. Okay, and we're falling for this sort of language. But that's just an example. My point here is that you have all these different reactions that are coming now. But that is the East. The question is, what about us in the West? We are also reacting to this phenomenon. We are also reacting. Our scholars are also reacting. Our communities are also reacting. As a matter of fact, we are in the epicenter of this, this modern world. We are in the right in the center of this. Now, the reactions from the Muslim world over here, we can look around. You also have, sometimes you have similar movements. Sometimes you have these reformist movements. Sometimes you have these very liberal movements. Sometimes you have these very conservative movements, even in the West, right? So we are all reacting to this. And sometimes in the West, it leads to identity crisis, right? What is identity crisis? That's exactly what this is, right? The West and the East, this modern and the pre-modern is clashing, and the poor Muslim has no idea how to navigate the world at this point. They end up having a identity crisis. But so the question we're going to discuss is, how should we react, and what is the principle by which we should be reacting? But I'm going to flip the question a little bit, and I'll say that imagine you were a non-Muslim and you were living in a world where Islam was dominating. Okay, that pre-modern or that God-centric lens was dominating, and you were a non-Muslim. And now you lived in the East. You lived, let's say, in Qom, or you lived in Najaf. You lived in the epicenter of this God-centric world. And you were a non-Muslim. You don't accept this worldview. You don't believe in their worldview. How would you react living in the epicenter of the Muslim world? What would you do? Would you come out all guns blazing? Maybe you're gonna protest against them because from your lens this is a oppression, perhaps. Would you protest? Would you join the academia? Perhaps would you join their universities and try to change the discourse over there? Would you try to buy out the kings and the scholars? Okay. Would you just come and bomb them? Okay. So in the Western world, like that has already, all of these things have already happened, right? I say that you don't even have to ask this as a presumption. We can just go right now to the Muslim world and see the places where these modern institutions already exist. We can go and look at them, what they're already doing. Last year, this time, for around 2 months, I was in Lebanon. And, speaking of Lebanon, we pray, inshallah, that the people of Lebanon, the hardships that they are going through, especially, recently with the, that explosion in Beirut, we pray, inshallah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gets them out of these hardships very soon. But last year I was in Lebanon for 2 months, and I was in a very heavily, Sunni populated city up north called Tripoli. I was there for 2 months, and I got an opportunity to volunteer with some of the NGOs. Okay, so these NGOs are organizations that are there trying to do different types of work. So they're trying to educate the Syrian refugees there, and they're trying to help the Palestinian refugees. They're trying to help even people in Lebanon, educational programs, all sorts of stuff. So from the outside, it sounds pretty good, the one I was volunteering for a bit, it was trying to take care of these Syrian refugees that had come and their children who now had, they were dropped out of school. They don't have no school education. So they were helping taking care of these Syrian children. Okay. And now these Syrian children, they were not orphans. So they had parents, and you could see their parents were actually very religious, hijab, the men had beards, very religious people. Their language, they will use, Allah, astaghfirullah, inshallah. So you can tell it's a religious, sort of group of people that were there. And now in the NGO, all you have are a bunch of Europeans, and you have some Americans, and I was the only Canadian. Okay, but I was not really Canadian because technically, for me, as far as they're concerned, I'm a Pakistani Muslim. Okay, but everybody else was a non-Muslim from Europe or from the West. Now, look, they can go there as an NGO and they can say, hey guys, we're here to brainwash you. Inshallah, this year we're going to be brainwashing you with all the Western dogma that we want to basically convey to you. Is that what they're going to say? That's not what they say. They come in, and these NGOs are being funded by, the one I was with, it was being funded by France. Okay, so they're being funded by Western governments, and they, as a matter of fact, are already doing what they want to achieve. As I mentioned yesterday or 2 days ago with the Fir'auni principles, they're trying to get rid of those two elements, the knowledge or the action, and they do it in such a good way that the children who are now being brought up, or now they're going to these institutions, which are free institutions, they will end up growing up, and very naturally they will end up learning or looking at the world from a God-centric perspective. Okay, I'm only giving this as an example to show that, look, you can already see how the West is doing this. It's not always, for example, through warfare and bombing, which is also there. That also happens. Okay, they don't achieve anything. That's for their own, oil or whatever. But over here, they're also trying to make sure that the next generation of Muslims grows up in such a way where they align to our values. Okay. Now that is, what basically is already happening. Now, when it comes to us, we also realize, living in the West, that we also have certain responsibilities. Okay, if these guys feel they have a responsibility to go to the Muslim lands and educate the Muslims and the young next generation and make them grow up in a way where they are learning Western values, then we might say that we also have certain responsibilities where we have to educate people about the Islamic values. So the thing is, though, how are we supposed to go about and do that? Because how are we, how is that responsibility supposed to look like? Okay. Now, over here, we say that one of the paradigms we want to discuss in this context is that in the West, because look, this is going to come under this idea called activism. Okay. And we say Islam, by its very beginning, was a religion that was an activist religion. The Prophet was not just sitting there doing nothing. From day one, from the proclamation of prophethood and the declaration of prophethood, he was acting and he was doing, making sure that these people are leaving shirk, they're coming towards Islam. And, it was a 22-decade long process, and he was doing something. So he was trying to cause change in society. He was trampling over some, or at least at the very least, he was going against popular, status quo of that time. Correct? Now, the thing is, though, in the Western context, is that activism that we often see in the East, or that resistance that we often see in the East, is that activism supposed to look exactly the same way as it looks in the East? Is it supposed to look exactly the same way that the Prophet or some of the Imams did? How is this activism supposed to look like? Okay, what is it supposed to look like? Okay, over here, I want to mention, which is the discussion today, is that, look, and by the way, I'm not going to be discussing specific, I'm not trying to, critique any specific examples. This is just a discussion, which is that when we have certain activists in the community, they need to realize that there is a paradigm in the West, just like we discussed yesterday, the paradigm of freedom. There is a paradigm in the modern West which says that action is superior to contemplation. Okay? Action is superior to contemplation. Inshallah, we're going to expand on this. What do we mean by this? Okay? When you look at the Islamic ethos and the Islamic tradition, what you see is that when you open our hadith books, the first chapter that opens up in a book like Usul al-Kafi is what? Kitab al-Aql, the book of the intellect. After that, it talks about intellect and tafakkur. Okay? Tafakkur and ilm. So you have intellect, contemplation, and knowledge. After these three, does the idea of amal come into place? Meaning what? Action is after the process of aql, tafakkur, and ilm. So it is not superior to tafakkur. It is not superior to contemplation. But the West flips this, and we'll explain why does it flip it and how does it get flipped. And it ruins the hierarchy of these two concepts. It says, no, action is superior to contemplation. Okay, or sometimes it doesn't even need any contemplation. Okay. So there's a couple of ahadith I will quote quickly to show you how the Islamic tradition shows you that tafakkur is more important than amal. Okay. For example, one hadith says that ليس لعبادة كثرة الصلاة والصوم إنما لعبادة التفكر. Ibadah, action, is not what you're thinking is just salat and som, or basically ibadat. Rather, ibadah is actually tafakkur, contemplation. Okay. Another narration says that tafakkur is better than qiyamul layl or qiyamul laylatin. Okay. Tafakkur, contemplation, is better than standing up, the whole night in ibadah, basically in worship. And ibadah over here means action. It's a type of action. But these riwayat, there's like 4 or 5, I don't have to quote all of them, seem to show that look, contemplation actually is, there is this level of superiority that it enjoys. And it is with this tafakkur that this ibadah also now has value. Ibadah and your amal without tafakkur, the value is less. Okay, you may get the job done, but the significance and the value of it is less. That's the Islamic perspective. That's the Islamic perspective. Okay, but when it comes to the West, they say no. Action has to dominate the contemplation. Okay, maybe some of you are wondering, how does this make sense? Like, this is, in this society, we are always talking about, rationality and thinking, and we're going to universities, and so how is it that action is superior to contemplation? It seems like contemplation is superior. Look, we're not saying that the West doesn't contemplate at all. Okay, that's not what we're saying. What we're saying is that the hierarchy is being ruined. Okay, it's not that they don't think. The hierarchy is being ruined, and you're gonna start seeing this when I give you a couple of examples. When we finish grade 12, most of us, what do we say? We have two options. We either have to go to university or we go to college. What is the justification given? And by the way, I'm not hating on people who go college or university. Okay, I'm just trying to show you that this is built into the system. What is the justification given by people who go to college? They say, you're wasting time in university. 4 years, you're just learning theory. College, 2 years, I'll learn the skills and that's it. I'm going to go straight into the job field. Okay? Meaning what? They're saying that, look, that theoretical aspect is useless. Why are you wasting 4 years of university? Okay? And by the way, like, I'm not trying to defend universities. Modern universities have their own problems. I'm just trying to say that, look at the way we're thinking. Okay? So that's one example. But I say, okay, go further. Let's say the guy who does go to university, or the girl that does go to university, how many people go to the humanities or philosophy or history, as opposed to going to accounting, business, med school, all the other stuff, right? The sciences. What are they going to say over there? They're going to say, look, now that we've come to university, first they told the college guys that, no, we're into theory. We want to learn 4 years of theory. But when they come to university, they're going to tell the humanities and the philosophies and social sciences that, oh, you're wasting your 4 years of just studying this, boring theory. You should have done accounting. Why? Because once I've done, I'm going to get a job. Okay? So the actual goal is not the contemplation. That's not what has priority. The job has priority. What I'm going to do afterwards, that has priority. And you see this all over, like, even from my own experience, like when some of us, like when we were in Hausa just 3, 4, 5 years only, sometimes we encounter, different people in the communities, different communities, it doesn't have to be in Toronto. Sometimes someone will come and say, brother, you've been there 4 years and you should come back. Like, the community needs people like you. And I'm just thinking, like, what do you mean people like me? I haven't studied anything. Like, no, 4 years is enough. There's a vacuum. We need someone right now. This is also that action which is being reflected. The person does not realize that if someone after 3, 4 years comes back and starts taking care of the community, the damage that he will do is much, greater than the vacuum that he's going to fill up. Okay? So instead of saying, brother, you know what, you should study 10, 15, 20 years and then come back, then we will take you seriously. The idea is that, no, we need someone immediately right now, even if it's 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, okay? All around you in your popular culture, in advertising, have you ever seen an ad that tells you or is telling you something which says, just stop and contemplate, just stop and think? I personally haven't seen one, but all around you, you'll see all sorts of ads. For example, Nike says, just do it. Adidas or will say, like, nothing is impossible. Or the Energizer Bunny will tell you, like, keep going, keep going, keep going. What are all these phrases? What are they trying to tell you to do? That, you can change your will or your identity, at will. Just do it. And it's pushing this mentality into you, like, because look, if you say just stop and think, it doesn't work with the modern mindset, because in the modern mindset, it's about self-fulfillment. And self-fulfillment and fulfilling your desires goes against the idea of contemplation, because contemplation is going to make you stop and pause for a moment. And when there is no idea of the eternal afterlife, when there's no spirituality, there's no spiritual dimension to your life, when it's just this 60, 70, 80 years, you want to do as much as you can in the 70 years, and you have to do it as soon as possible. Okay? There's no time to think. There are two Latin words, one of them is otium and one of them is negotium. Okay? Now these words, as far as I know, they didn't come down into English, but they exist in Spanish and some other European languages. Otium is translated in English as leisure. Okay? Classically, in the pre-modern world, the word otium, when they said leisure, this was time for spiritual reflection. Okay? And negotium, to negate basically, to what the knee is going to negate it, meant that you are now causing disturbance in this leisure time. You're causing disturbance, meaning what? The leisure time is the thing that has superiority. That reflection, that time to think and contemplate was superior. Negotium is now you causing a disturbance in this. Negotium turns into negotiation today. Okay? The modern world changed the connotations of these two things. Leisure today is considered to be a waste of time. Okay? When you get asked, maybe sometimes in a job interview, what do you do what are you doing for leisure purposes? The expectation is that you're not doing anything productive. Okay? You're doing something which is not work. Okay? Which is not work. Work now becomes superior to leisure. Whereas in the pre-modern world, leisure meant, no, you are doing something, but it's contemplation and reflection over your deeds that you're going to perform and what are the consequences of these deeds. So you see, the Western paradigm is changing this. It is slowly, it has changed, and now we are living in it. Where action is everything, where the need for speed is everything, just do it is everything, nothing is impossible. These are the slogans that we are being brought up into. Okay? So just like yesterday, how I explained how freedom is changed, the meaning has changed, and I gave the example of hijab, we'll discuss a little bit of how sometimes some people who are into activism now, which I said already is part of the Islamic responsibility, sometimes this activism ends up falling for this paradigm. Okay? That's all we're going to try to argue today, okay? We say in Islam, one of the most crucial discussions is this idea of responsibility versus consequences. Every act has a certain consequence, correct? But there's discussion like, should you be responsibility oriented or should you be consequences oriented? Meaning what? Is it okay for you to say, if you have a responsibility, is it okay for you to say that, let's say you did a responsibility and you did not achieve the consequences? When is it okay for you to say that, brother or sister, I did my wazifa, I did my responsibility, the result and the consequence was not in my favor, but that is in Allah's hands. The consequence is in Allah's hand. I did my best. When is it okay to say this? And when is it not okay to say this? When does it become an excuse? When does it become a scapegoat where you put the blame on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and you try to escape any blame for your actions? Okay? So we say, let me give you an example, right? We say in Muharram, by the way, I had some very specific examples that if I was in the tent at council, I would have used those examples. But because, this is not just now council people listening, other people are listening too. So I'm going to try to keep it vague with examples. So, this example I haven't seen in our community, but in the US, I've heard from some of my friends. They say that, look, in Muharram, some brothers and sisters, they're very passionate and they want to spread the message of Imam Hussein. So what ends up happening is that they end up inviting either a Sunni or, a non-Muslim or a non-Muslim, right? Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Sometimes they end up inviting a Sunni or a non-Muslim in the masjid in Muharram. Now, this non-Shia, when they come to the masjid, this person is bringing them because they feel there's a wazifa, there's a responsibility of spreading the message of Imam Hussein, and they're going to bring them to the majlis. This person, this new person who's interested in Islam, or this, Sunni brother or sister, they want to learn about Shiism, they come to the masjid. Speech is fine, okay, fine, they hear the speech, and then all of a sudden the lights go off. On the men's section, the shirts are off, and the coffin is coming, the taboot, and the matam is going on. So these are real experiences that some people said that, look, these people that they had brought into the masjid, they freaked out because they absolutely had no cultural reference to what on earth is going on. Okay, and they really got put off. And they said, what on earth is this? Now, some of them would reply, oh, it's okay. Like, I did my wazifa. I brought him to the masjid, but rest was in Allah's hands. Yes, rest is in Allah's hands, but look, you can't use Allah as an excuse for the fact that you did not consider the possible consequences of your actions. It wasn't that difficult for you to just spend some time to think that, look, if this person is brought to the masjid and they are not used to seeing these cultural references, that nothing happens to us when we see them, but because they're not used to it, they may be put off completely by their religion. How long does it take to think about this? But because you are so action oriented, you want to just do something, you bring them to the masjid, but you cause a lot of damage. This person now never wants to look at Shia Islam again. Okay? So now, some people even take it to such an extent where they use Imam Hussein alayhi salam himself as a justification to say that we can do our wazifa without worrying about the consequences. Some of them use Imam Hussein himself, and they make it look like as if Imam Hussein was not thinking about what he was doing, as if he was not considering the consequences of his actions. And tomorrow we will discuss on this example specifically to show that no, Imam Hussein, every move he took, he was thinking. It was a contemplative movement. Okay, he thought about what he's doing, and then he did it. He didn't just go blindly and from the beginning, just I'm just gonna go and get myself killed. That's not what happened. Okay, that's not what happened. So inshallah, tomorrow we will bring quotes from Imam Hussein to show that, look, it was a very rational and he thought out movement, and we'll bring quotes from Imam Hussein himself. I want to quote something from Ayatollah Khamenei. So he's speaking to a group of university students. So there are a couple of quotes from Imam Khomeini, where Imam Khomeini says that, people are either asking him, you brought a revolution, subhanallah, amazing. And he says that, look, all I did is my wazifa. I just did my wazifa. I acted on my wazifa. These are quotes sentences that people say. He's not always going to explain every single detail when you're having a discussion or a conversation or an interview. So what ends up happening is some people will take this and they will try to push this idea that, doesn't matter what the consequences are, just do your wazifa. Ayatollah Khamenei brings this exact same quote and he expands on it. Okay, and he expands on it. He says, look, this is not what you think it means. He says, Ma dumbale taklif hastim. We are after responsibility. Wali aya in manash inas ki Imam Khomeini dumbale natije nabud. Does that mean Imam Khomeini was not after the consequences? چطور میشود چنین چیزی را گفت? He's like, how can you say such a thing? He's like, امام بزرگوار با آن شدت در سنین کهولت این همه سختی ها رو دنبال کرد. He's like, in that age, all this hardship, all these difficulties he went through, and you're telling me that he didn't care what the consequences are going to be? And then he goes on and he says, all the prophets that came, were they just about, oh, let me just do my wazifa, and he says, harche should, like whatever happens, it's nothing to do with me. He says, no, all the efforts of the Payghambaran, he's like, dumbale, they were after the natija, they were after the consequences. Okay? Then he says that, look, what he says, I'm summarizing, he says, look, the thing is that when you do your responsibility, when you have considered everything, when you have calculated the consequences, the potential consequences, after all you've taken everything into consideration, and then you do your taklif, then you do your wazifa and responsibility, and let's say after that, the consequence that you wanted is not achieved, he says, then you can say it was in Allah's hands. It was in Allah's will what he wanted over here. And he says that, look, this can only be done after واقعیت ها را ملاحظه کرده و دیده است و بر طبق این واقعیت ها برنامه ریزی و کار کرده. He's like, this is after they have seen the situation around them, the reality of the situation, and they have set a strategy for this situation, they have considered it, and then they have done their wazifa, responsibility. Okay? Now, if we don't keep this into perspective, okay, if we don't keep this in perspective, which is a very, as I've already shown, like the West will push you to just do it. It will not tell you to think through what you're about to do. Sometimes you will end up making mistakes, okay? But the God-centric lens will tell you that, look, any responsibility that you have in the religion, so by the way, responsibility over here, we say that we have certain responsibilities which are ibadat, salat, som, and so on. Over there, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows what the wisdom behind some of those ibadat are. We don't know why we pray 4 rakat. But there are acts of non-ibadat, okay? Marriage, divorce, business transactions, making a community, building a government. None of these require a niyat. Like, you don't have to say qurbatan ilallah for their validity. Unlike, let's say, ghusl and salat. Over there, no matter how much you pray, if you don't have the niyat, salat is not valid. The ghusl is not valid. That's what we call ibadat. And you have ghayr ibadat, which you don't need a niyat for. But these are things which we know what Allah wants from these things. Okay, Allah Himself tells you. For example, in marriage, this is the purpose of marriage. This is the purpose of building a government, building a community. We're gonna, inshallah, I'm gonna give examples. But my point here is that, look, because the Western idea of activism is reflected in doing something, and it sees a sort of, it sees contemplation, which is also, according to Islam, is considered ibadah, which is an action. If you look at this from a Western perspective, you're going to think your contemplation is a waste of time. Okay? And what you will end up doing is taking a certain form of activism, for example, that may be, coming out in the public, let's say, and you may turn it into an idol, and you're going to start worshiping it, and you're going to start judging people who don't conform to this specific form of activism. I'm going to give you a real example where this happened. We have, different sects of even Shiaism. We say we believe in 12 Imams. Then you have the Ismailis, who believe in the son of Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, and from there they have, their own lines of Imams. And then you have the Zaydi Shias. Many of us may have heard the Zaydi Shias. What is the difference? What is the theological difference between the Zaydis and us? The Zaydis said that we only accept someone as an imam if they do a qiyam, if they do a revolt with a sword. If they don't do a revolt, we are not going to accept them as an imam. They are not an imam. Because of this belief, because they turned this form of activism into an idol, they ended up rejecting all of our other imams. Okay? They didn't accept Imam Baqir, they didn't accept Imam Sadiq, they didn't accept Imam Qadim, Rida, all the way to the end. They never accepted any of the imams because they turned this into an idol. Whereas our imams, neither did they turn the sulh, the truce of Imam Hassan alayhi salam into an idol, and neither did they turn the qiyam of Imam Hussein into an idol, and neither did they turn the education and the tadris that was being done by Imam Sadiq into an idol. Everything for its time and place. Okay? And each of these things are activism. But sometimes when you act like Imam Sadiq, the Western and the modern idea of activism and the paradigm may think that you are wasting your time. Whereas if you ask any scholar and any historian, they will tell you the most significant period and the crucial period for the development of Tashayyu was Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, and hence why we are called Jafari. Okay? I will quote you a hadith where somebody comes to Imam Sadiq alayhi salam and he says that the Zaydis, so by that time the Zaydi is a big sect, they say, look, the Zaydis like you. You're from the lineage of Imam Hussein, Imam Zainul Abidin, they like you. Why don't you, come on, like, just come, do a little bit of qiyam, show them a little bit of, yeah, I'm ready to come out with you. And they will they will love it. They already like you, they have this room for you, they will love you, and they will just take you on as an imam and as a leader. Look at what the imam says. This is really interesting. Imam says to them, so the person who's telling the imam, his name is Sulaiman. Imam Sadiq says, "Oh Sulaiman, if those fools," okay, as-sufaha, safi means foolish. If those fools are intending that they would prevent us from our knowledge and they want us to go to their ignorance, then they are not welcome. I don't care about them. But if they had heeded our words and would have waited for our command, okay, I am the imam, I will tell you when to do your qiyam and when not to do the qiyam, then I would have not have any problem. But they don't want to listen to me. They just want somebody to do a qiyam. Okay? This is a very clear example. And the point I'm trying to show here is that, look, you cannot take one form of activism as a idol. It has its place, it has its time, and we all, especially in our communities, we do engage in that type of activism as well. We also engage in other types of activism. None of them should become idols for us. It's about thinking it through and figuring out which form needs to be applied at this time. Okay? Real example in Islamic fiqh, which tells you and which makes it very clear that thinking is important, are the rulings of Amr bil Ma'ruf. Amr bil Ma'ruf, every single faqih has said, before you do Amr bil Ma'ruf, before you tell someone, brother, you're, masalan, not praying, you should be praying. Or sister, please fix your hijab. Before you do this, think of the consequences. Will this person, will it have any effect on this person or no? If it won't have any effect, you do not have a wazifa. You do not have a responsibility. I was sitting with one of my friends from England in Qom a couple of years back, actually, in the office of Ayatollah Shubairi Zanjani, one of the big maraji in Iran. And I think this was in the beginning of the summer or like early month of Ramadan. It was empty. Like, it was one of those days it was emptier. So me and our friend are like, wow, we're going to get just 4 or 5 people in the crowd. This person comes in who we had never seen before. So he's wearing a turban, young guy comes in, and he just sits in the corner. And Ayatollah Zanjani, he's old, of old age, so he sits on his chair. And this person starts complaining. Oh, Sayyid, I was just entering your office. It's in the street besides the Haram of Masuma Qom. There's like a small street. He's like, I was coming and this lady was coming and her hair was showing, and I just told her, hey, lady, fix your hair. And she just started swearing at me and telling me off. And she's like, damn you and all this, and started insulting me. And he's like, oh my God, what is happening with the Muslim women? What should we do? Where are these women going? He legit is complaining. He said, I did my wazifa, I did my Amr bil Ma'ruf. And Sayyid Zanjani, I remember me and my friend were there, we started cracking up. The way he said it in Farsi, he said, who on earth told you to say that to her? Who on earth told you you had a wazifa? Who on earth told you you were supposed to do Amr bil Ma'ruf or Nahy anil Munkar over there? You don't even know who the lady was. You don't even know who she was. And now with your statement, this is the reaction now that she has about scholars, that they just come and start interfering with, people's lives on public. So our own rulings, this idea is built in. Another place where this is built in is in the rules of warfare. Okay, I won't use the Arabic term, but the rules of warfare. You are only supposed to fight or engage in a war, especially offensive war, when you know you can win the battle. Okay? When you know you can win the battle. So that means you have to first think it through. When we engage with an enemy, can we actually win or no? Or do we have to employ a different strategy? This is not about, no, we have to fight the enemies. Just send our soldiers one by one. These keep getting shaheed, keep getting killed. And you feel happy that, okay, yeah, we have, shohada. And at the end, there's nothing left of your community. There's nothing left of your country. There's nothing left of your society. you're finished, as Mahmoud Hijab would say, right? You're finished. This is not the way Islamic law even works. Even Islamic law, you're not allowed to do that. Okay? This is very basic fiqh, by the way. So what do we do then? What do we do? What's the practical solution? Okay? Are we just gonna just contemplate now forever and never do anything? Is that what Islam says? Of course not, right? Of course not. I'm gonna summarize a very simple solution. And if those who are interested in some of the brothers and sisters in the community study this book called Theological Instructions of Ayatollah Misbah Yazdi. I know a lot of brothers and sisters read this book or have studied it. Ayatollah Misbah Yazdi's book. In the second chapter, he talks about, there's a section called Resolution of a Doubt. In the English translation, that's how it is. He's using a very specific rational argument there. I'm going to try to use that same argument over here in our scenario, okay? But if someone wants to know how, more details about that argument, they can go look at that book and see how, and he's using it somewhere else, okay? I'm just telling you that this is the exact same argument we're going to use here. We say, when you have a wazifa, and from that wazifa or from that responsibility, there's a certain goal and a certain consequence that you want to achieve, certain result that you want to achieve. You analyze the situation and you realize that, look, if we fulfill our responsibility, we have conviction, we have itminan, we are convinced that the result will be achieved. Okay? If you are convinced, over here, you go and do your responsibility. No questions asked. Okay? You do your responsibility. That's one scenario. Second scenario, you have a responsibility, or you think you have a responsibility, you analyze the situation, and you realize that, we are convinced we are not going to attain our result. We're not going to achieve anything over here. So what do? Islam says you have no responsibility, because the responsibility was because you wanted to achieve something. If that is not going to be achieved, you have nothing, you don't have to do it. Okay? But these two are not where the discussion is. It's the third scenario where it can get complicated, where now it's not about conviction, but it's about probabilities. You have a scenario where you have a responsibility. You give a probability that, look, if we fulfill this responsibility, we can achieve the desired result. There's a very high chance. But there's also a chance that we may not achieve the results. Over here, you should also do your responsibility. Okay? Because the chance of not achieving it is less. But look at the fourth scenario. You have a responsibility. You give a chance. You say that if we do it, there's a chance we may we may achieve the result. But there is a very, very serious probability and a possibility that if we do not achieve the consequences, the negative consequences are too much for us to handle. Okay? Because sometimes you may not achieve the result, but there's no negative consequences. Okay? But no, sometimes you doing an action and not achieving the result, the negative consequences of that far outweigh the potential and the possible consequences that you could have achieved. It is in this scenario where we as a community, the intellectuals, the scholars, the activists, the academics, these senior figures of the community, this is where you have to come together and actually analyze and contemplate and discuss and think before you do something. Okay? Before you do something. And this is where the difference will come into existence, where you will see some who, because of that Western modern paradigm of just do it and nothing is impossible, and our identity, we can change it in, with our own will immediately, that hastiness will come over here. And in fact, it's actually just agitation and frustration, and that's why they end up doing it. They don't have the patience to just stop and think and communicate and do mushawara and consult with people. And I would even say that if communities are in this situation, that it should not be one scholar calling the shots. This is also against the sunnah of the Prophet, the sunnah of Islam. Even the Quran tells the Prophet that you should do mushawara, consult with your companions before you do something. Okay, now we can say the Prophet had ilmul ghaib and so on. I don't want to talk about those. But the point here is that Islam tells you to consult. If the Prophets and Imams have to consult, who is any one figure who's going to call the shots and basically make decisions for the whole community, especially when it comes to some very risky decisions that sometimes we take? Okay, under the context that we are maybe perhaps, following the seerah of Imam Hussein, or following the seerah of Imam Hassan, or following the seerah of Imam Rida, or following the seerah of Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, whatever the case may be. Okay, as I said, none of these are we making them into idols. We are simply trying to give a practical solution on how we should be thinking about these things before we commit to doing an action. Okay, so inshallah, that was the topic for today. Tomorrow I will address this idea that some seem to portray that as if Imam Hussein was not thinking about the consequences of his actions, that he was just going, into this battlefield, and whatever happens, happens. Is that really true, or is it not true? And what is the evidence? What does Imam Hussein himself seem to explain and tell us, inshallah? So that's for tomorrow. Sallallahu alaykum ya ahl bayt an-nubuwah. Sallallahu alaykum ya ahl bayt an-nubuwah. صلى الله عليك يا أبا عبد الله وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك. عليك مني سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار، ولا جعله الله آخر اللحد مني لزيارتكم. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. صلى الله عليك يا أبا عبد الله، صلى الله عليك يا مظلوم، صلى الله عليك أيها الشهيد بكربلاء عطشانا. May Allah's peace and blessings be upon you, my beloved Imam al-Hussein, the Imam who was killed by the shores of the Euphrates, while his mouth was dry of thirst. Sallallahu alayka ya Aba Abdullah. From amongst the companions of Imam al-Hussein, tonight we want to remember one of the closest companions of Abi Abdullah, one of the lovers of Amir al-Mu'mineen, one of the lovers of Imam al-Mujtaba Habib. On the night of Ashura, when Imam al-Hussein had gathered his companions, he asked them, if any of you wants to leave, you can leave. The enemies don't have anything to do with you. The enemies only want me. Habib, this companion, this friend of Imam al-Hussein, he says to the Imam, Ya Hussein, by Allah, we will never leave you. What would be the point of life without you, Ya Aba Abdullah? Imam al-Hussein, he says to them, by Allah, I have never seen such loyal companions. On that night, he tells all of his companions to engage in ibadah, to engage in worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, until a point comes when Imam al-Hussein takes a few of his companions, he stops them from their ibadat, he calls them out in the middle of the night. He begins to pick up the thorns from around the tents of the women and the children. He begins to pick up the thorns from the earth of Karbala. The companions ask Imam al-Hussein, Ya Imam, Ya Mawlai, what are you doing in this darkness of the night? Imam al-Hussein says to them, O my companions, you do not know what the enemies will do tomorrow evening, when my children and women will be running from one tent to another tent. I don't want these thorns to injure the women and the children when the enemies are burning the tents. Habib comes to them. Habib comes to the Imam. He says to the Imam, by Allah, what will we, by Allah, he says to the Imam, he says, will the enemies really do that to them? Imam al-Hussein says to Habib, yes. Lady Zainab, salamullahi alayha, she's overhearing this conversation. Aqilatu bani Hashim, ummul masaib. Lady Zainab, salamullahi alayha, she has experience. She's seen her mother being disrespected in Medina. She saw the injured head of her father in the city of Kufa. She saw her brother Imam al-Mujtaba throwing up his internal organs in Medina. She has experience. She says to Imam al-Hussein, Ya akhi, I am questioning the loyalty of your companions. Habib hears this. He rushes back to the companions. He goes to the tent where all the companions are. He tells them, O ashab, what are you doing? Aqilatu bani Hashim is questioning your loyalty. They come to Lady Zainab, salamullahi alayha. They pledge allegiance to Zainab. They tell her, don't worry, Ya Zainab, we'll be on the side of Imam al-Hussein tomorrow on the day of Ashura. When the battle had begun, the time of prayers had come. One of the companions says to Imam al-Hussein, Ya Aba Abdullah, I would love to meet my Lord while I have prayed the salat. Imam al-Hussein praises this companion. He sends Habib, he tells Habib to go tell the enemies to allow us to pray the noon salat. Habib goes to the enemies and he tells the enemies, allow us to pray. They respond to Habib, they say to him, no, what's the point? The prayers of Imam al-Hussein will not be accepted. Habib responds to them, Ya adu Allah, O enemies of Allah, do you really think the salat of the grandson of the Holy Prophet will not be accepted? But your prayers while you're killing Imam al-Hussein will be accepted. By Allah, that's not true. Imam al-Hussein, he begins the prayers. Some of the companions take the opportunity to defend Imam al-Hussein while he's praying with some of the companions. Habib, this loyal companion of Imam al-Hussein, He's protecting the Imam. The enemies, they try to attack Habib. They try to bring him down. Habib is able to kill one of the soldiers. They make a plan, they make a plot. They try to bring Habib down. They ambush him, they bring him down. They kill him, they kill Habib in front of Imam al-Hussein. Imagine the feelings of Abi Abdullah, his loyal friend, his loyal companion has been killed, and they kill Habib, they sever his head. In the Maqatil, I read this myself, and they began to play with the head of Habib. They tied his head around a horse. They began to ride that horse, making fun of Habib. Brothers and sisters, when I read this in the Maqtal, by Allah, I did not think about the head of Habib. My mind went to Sham when they placed the head of Imam al-Hussein in front of Yazid, la'natullahi alayhi, فجعل ينكث ثنايا الحسين. When he began to hit the head of Imam al-Hussein, when he began to hit the teeth of Imam al-Hussein, وحسينا وحسينا لا لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين. وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون. بأبي أنتم وأمي وأهلي ومالي وأولادي وأسرتي يا آل رسول الله. Oh Allah, we ask you to please accept this ibadat of ours tonight. Allah, we ask you to please forgive all of our sins tonight. Oh Allah, we ask you by the right of Zainab, by the right of the tears of Lady Zainab, to please extinguish the fire that's burning for us. Oh Allah, we ask you to please assist all the marajim, all the scholars, all of those who are helping to serve the cause of Islam. We ask you to please assist them. Oh Allah, we ask you to please help all the oppressed Muslims, all the oppressed believers wherever they are. Oh Allah, we know that the solution to all of our problems is the hastening of Imam al-Mahdi, and we ask you to please enable us to be one of his close companions, inshallah. Matam ya Hussein.